So she got a man to come and do all three of us. And he did it with scissors, and he had antiseptic but no anesthesia, so we weren't anesthetized. It is to ensure that you're a virgin, so the sewing of the genitals is more important than the cutting. The cutting, there are so many stories that surround it. There's one superstition, my grandmother really believed that the clitoris would grow and dangle between your legs, and it could...
Almost like a penis.
Almost like a penis, or even bigger. I think people believed, and some of the more superstitious, some of the superstitions were all about that when a baby is born, the clitoris will grow and go around the neck and strangle the baby, but that it could also make a man impotent, all of those things. And the more normal, common reason is after puberty, after menstruation, girls tend to become sexually excited and aroused, easily aroused, and as a preemptive measure, the clitoris is cut off before they reach the age of puberty so that they will not lose sexual control. There's no standard method for it. It all depends on the person who's doing it and how much he or she is accomplished at it. There are many little girls who die because the women who do it attempt to take off the whole clitoris and they bleed to death. Some of the girls also die because of the instruments used. Sometimes they're scissors, sometimes they're razor blades, sometimes it's broken glass, it's any sharp object. Around and say it's not so much me who's anti-Islam as that Islam is anti-freedom and anti-me. Let's start with the fact that I left Islam, and for that I have to be killed. That's not something we see now in other religions. It's also the way women are treated in Islam actively. I know that in other religions women have a lower status, but it's not enforced.
Do you remember the moment when you became an atheist?
Yes, officially. It's the moment I went and looked at myself in the mirror and asked myself, do I really believe in God now? That was in May 2002. And
Was it gradual, or was it just overnight?
Everything preceding that moment was gradual, but the big catalyst was the 11th of September 2001. Before that, I had this, what I call the little shutter at the back of my mind, and I would keep all dissonant thoughts in there and lock it, and I could live in that way. I lived that way for 10 years. I mean, calling myself and thinking of myself as a Muslim, but not practicing it in any way, in any meaningful way at all. Then came the 11th of September, and it was a challenge. It wasn't just a challenge from Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's point of view, come and join us. It was also, he divided the world into believers and unbelievers. And that's how I grew up, thinking you're either a believer or you're an unbeliever. And everything in me, the Satan in me, had now become so big and was so full grown that I thought, I don't want any of this. Do you choose what God says, or do you choose what you want? And what you want, if it is not what God wants you to do, is the Satan whispering in your ear. So the choices were always between Satan and God. In my case, Satan won. Is it
the reason that you don't speak to your mother and the rest of your family because they are angry at you are becoming an atheist and giving up Islam?
I want to speak to them, but they don't want to speak to me because they're afraid they're going to burn in hell. My mother is put in the cruel choice that she either gives me up because I've become an apostate, or she goes to hell. That's a terrible choice. It's a cruel choice. And I think that's what we need. These fears, which we as Muslims all have, I think first and foremost we have to talk about it and say, I'm afraid of going to hell if I do this, this and that. And even by thinking it, even by speaking loudly, you know you're blaspheming. You know you're committing a sin. It's just that strong of a hold that it has on the minds of people.
There was something in you that was rebelling against this religion.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
It didn't come from anywhere. I think it's just the individual. That's just how we are. You know, if you look at terms like hypocrite, most of my life I spent living as a hypocrite anyway, because I was praying and pretending that prayer was affecting me, but I was only doing it because I was supposed to, not because I felt any connection with God or to whoever I was supposed to feel something with.
So all the time that you were a Muslim and you were practicing Islam, you never felt any spirituality or any connection with God?
No, no. And I felt the fear of hell. I think what kept me in and what kept me going was just pure naked fear, not the spirituality. It was all, first of all, it was my first introduction to religion was, I was a little girl playing around and my grandmother was praying. And as you know, in Islam, there's a moment when you go down and put your forehead on the ground and your bum up. And I thought she was playing with me. And so I went dancing and prancing around her. But when she finished, she got hold of me and bit me and started to scream at me that I should never disturb her when she's talking to God. And I was like, but when I cooled and calmed down from crying, it was like there was no one she was talking to. And I like to refer to that moment all the time to say, I was never cured of that. There was never anyone in the room, all those those years. So I never felt any form of spirituality.
So you never talked to God yourself?
I tried to, but you know, the four walls don't answer.
Mm-hmm. So you ultimately, on your way to Canada to be with your new husband, who you had never had a sexual relationship with, you went off to Europe and ended up in Holland. And it was there that you began to read and study and question your religion. How did that happen? What was it that made you start? I mean, you clearly, if you didn't believe in God, you must have been drawn to those ideas and thoughts about religious scholarship. And
yeah, I was from the very beginning used to ask questions, and the questions I asked my teachers, Aziza and Boqalsom, were answered in the usual way. It's Satan talking to you. It's not the truth. Coming into Holland, a very secular country, taking political science, and especially political theory, and then learning about the history of how all of these societies and their frameworks, where they come from, and how they, you know, the period when there was no separation between church and state and the power of the church, and now that all of that led me to start to think on my own as well. But also while living in Kenya, I was introduced to reading and writing the English language, and I think that's when the seeds were sown, and in Holland they came to full growth and maturity.
Do you remember the moment when you became an atheist?
Yes, officially. It's the moment I went and looked at myself in the mirror and asked myself, do I really believe in God now? That was in May 2002, and I was
what
on the
brought
island
you
of
to
Crete
that
in
moment?
Greece.
Was it gradual, or was it just overnight?
Everything preceding that moment was gradual, but the big catalyst was the 11th of September 2001. Before that, I had this, what I call the little shutter at the back of my mind, and I would keep all dissonant thoughts in there and lock it, and I could live in that way I lived that way for 10 years. I mean, calling myself and thinking of myself as a Muslim, but not practicing it in any way, in any meaningful way at all. Then came the 11th of September, and it was a challenge. It wasn't just a challenge from bin Laden and Al-Qaeda's point of view, come and join us. It was also, he divided the world into believers and unbelievers. And that's how I grew up, thinking you're either a believer or you're an unbeliever. And everything in me, the Satan in me, had now become so big and was so full grown that I thought, I don't want any of this. I downloaded bin Laden's speeches and started to compare his quotes to quotes from the Quran. After a while, I started to ask my former boyfriend for a book he had tried to give me and convince me to read in 1998. I called him, and at the time we were exes, and I said, "Do you still have that brown book?" And the book is called The Atheist Manifest. And I got the book and I started to read, and it starts with, "Is there a God?" And you know, from that point, it was like, I can't read on without answering the question. I was with my friend, and she went out with her friends, alone in the room, looked at myself in the mirror and was like,